Good afternoon and welcome to Panel 1, Session 4, the last session for Panel 1. So you're having the last privileged access to this very interesting discussion that we've been having over the last day and a half. I'm Hannes McNulty and I'm the panel leader for this Panel 1 session. Panel 1 is about policies and programs for transformative change. We are, as part of this Panel 1, talking this time about learning how to do it better through experience. But before I go into the details about this particular session, I think it's no harm to give you a quick recap about what Panel 1 is about. The reason being is that Panel 1 has a focus on the types of step changes we need to bring about when it comes to designing new policies and programs. And these kind of step changes need to consider the way we connect the economics of business with the reality of climate change. Now, specifically underlying the Panel 1 discussion are two questions which we're using to drive the overall discussion. And these questions are really, number one, how can we deliver on a more effective multi-stakeholder approach by considering all the industry stakeholders like the industry, the sporting organizations, and the policymakers themselves. And then also, if we take into account that energy efficiency, while being, we'll say, the core element of decarbonization, we also have to consider how we interconnect with other important elements of decarbonization, such as financing, energy technologies, or emerging technologies, and renewable energy. So these are kind of the two core questions we've posed to the different speakers for Panel 1 and that we're addressing through the different sessions. So this afternoon for session number 4, like I said, it's called Learning How to Do It Better Through Experience. We have 4 very interesting panelists. We have Katrin Cooremans from the University of Lausanne. We have Johansson from the University of Gävle. We have Jason Lankford from Dow, and we have Soma Rahmani from the University of Mazandaran in Iran. And we will now in a second start the presentations, but before we do that, I would like to ask you, the audience, to pay particular attention to where we put your questions. We will be having the 4 presentations one after the other, and after that we will have the discussion. For that discussion, we depend on your questions. So please put all your questions into the Q&A section of the Whova application. And please not into the chat function, but the Q&A section. And we will use those questions at the end to get the discussion going and input into what we're going to talk about. So please keep that in mind. And without further ado, I will therefore turn to our first speaker, Katrin Cooremans, who will talk about valuing and communicating the multiple benefits of energy efficiency projects. Katrin, I hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. We are very pleased to be here. So yes, I will describe this afternoon a project called M-Benefits. It's an EU project called Valuing and Communicating the Multiple Benefits of Energy Efficiency Project. So it's not working. Ah, yes. So this project involves 14 countries and 14 partners, sorry, and 11 countries. You have the list of the partners here. It's a 3-year project. It will end during spring of next year. The context, the outline of my presentation is here. So first I will briefly describe the context of the project, then the concepts and method we have developed for this project, then the pilot projects, the ongoing pilot projects, which will end during this autumn. And finally, I will conclude. Regarding the context, here in this section, I would like to describe the reasons why this project was created. The first reason is that actually companies waste vast amount of energy. This is connected to a broad subject of the energy efficiency gap in industry or in companies. And we would like to reduce these energy efficiency gap. The second observation is regarding the fact that the classical engineering technico-economic approach, if we can call it like that, which consisted in identifying energy savings, then translate them into financial savings. Then if the financial savings is the project is profitable, then the investment will be decided by a company. This approach, which is the dominant approach actually in the field, unfortunately doesn't work, or doesn't work well enough. The fourth observation is that there are two parallel business culture and interests in companies. One is the interests and culture of production people, and you see they care about product quality, safety, cost, time of production or delivery. And I don't dare saying in front of them, but something like that. There are energy people, energy engineers, and they just care about energy consumption and energy costs. So we need to have these people communicate better. And this is also one of our goals. And finally, a lot of people, and this is my last observation, a lot of people speak about non-energy benefits for about 20 years now, but actually very few benefits, non-energy benefits are included in project energy efficiency project assessment. So based on that, we developed this project idea, and one of the main goals of the project was to develop a method to identify and value the non-energy benefits of energy efficiency projects in any type of organization. So it could be a firm, a company, industrial or services company. It could be also a municipality. So we indeed developed this method, which you can see here. It's the multiple benefits approach. You start with, it can be many things. Let's say an idea of an energy efficiency project or measure to be implemented in a company. It can be an energy audit. And then you have a 4 steps analysis. The first step starts with the company analysis, where you try to apply a broad perspective on what is this company doing. Then the second step is on energy and operation, then strategic impacts, and the 4th analytical steps is regarding the financial impact. The 5th steps actually consists in summarizing the results of the analysis and to put them in a nice way for the senior executives in companies. So I will now describe in a bit more details these different steps. The first one, the first step, so the first analytical steps intends to answer the question, what is this energy efficiency project's contribution to the company's business model? So first you need to analyze the business model, and for that we apply a very famous tool, which wasn't developed by us, but it's the business model canvas. You can find it on the internet. It's extremely useful. And so we go through this analysis to better understand what the company we analyze is doing and how an energy efficiency project could contribute to what the company is doing. The second question is going deep at the level of the project itself. So what is the aim of the project? And in energy terms and operational terms, what would be the contribution of the project? You see that actually step 2 answers the question, what is the project's contribution to operational excellence? And operational excellence is made of 4 dimensions: safety, quality, costs, and time. So the idea is to analyze the contribution of your project, your energy efficiency project, to these 4 dimensions. This brings me to a concept which is very important in this project regarding, it's the step 2 of the analysis, but it's also, I think, a new approach, and which is rather quite powerful. And you see here on the bottom line, you see the energy carriers, which can feed any type of building. So you have the primary and secondary carrier, tertiary carriers. These carriers feed certain machines and equipment. And I would say this, so energy carriers and the equipment consuming them, this is the engineer view. This is what they're looking for. It's just to reduce energy consumption by machine and equipment. Then you have the production people from the operations of a company. And these people, they are looking at process and they want to produce what they have to produce in the safest way and the more efficient way. And energy for them, it's something which is not important. And there's a gap between these two types of people. And one way to bridge this gap is to apply the concept of energy services. So how would my energy efficiency measure would contribute to improving those energy services, which will improve the quality and the safety of process. So this is a key aspect. And this is described here. So you are looking at the impact of your energy, of the envisioned energy efficiency measure on energy services constraints and risk. Step 3 tries to answer the question. So step 3 of the analysis, what is the project contribution to the company's competitive advantage? So it means actually to evaluate the contribution of your energy efficiency project, investment project, to a company's value proposition, the cost impact and the risk impacts. The conventional energy approach is to just analyze the reduced energy cost, and this is broadly this is the only argument which is being presented to companies, and it, as I said, it doesn't work well enough. If you look at this project here, if you want to have more details, you can go to our website, to the website of the projects, but you see that you have a lot of risks which are reduced, a lot of costs which are reduced apart from the energy cost. And you also, your project, in this case, it's a project, I'll let you see what it is. Anyway, it will have many impacts on a company's value proposition. And finally, the last step is, what is the financial profitability of the project? Normally, again, if you assess only the energy benefits, so the energy savings translated into monetary savings, here I took the same example. You have some financial assessment, you obtain results. You see that here, for this example, the payback was 13 years. If you include the non-energy benefits, the simple payback is reduced to 4.7 years. And finally, you will develop an argument, a broad argument on why you should adopt this project. So it's a summary, as I said, of all the analytical steps and all the results. This method, this approach I just described to you with the 5 steps was translated into a software. So you see it's exactly, you see again, company analysis, energy and operations, strategic impacts, financial impacts, and communication. You see all these steps here. In the software, you can navigate in a very friend user way into all the steps, and some results are copied from one step to another. And finally, you have a template to present the results. What we are doing now is to develop some pilot projects. I mentioned that. We have 34 pilot projects currently ongoing. I would have liked to be able to present you the results of these pilot projects, but unfortunately with the COVID situation, we've been delayed. But I think we will have all results in about 2 months, maybe 3 months maximum. You have 34 pilots in total. A lot are concerning industrial projects. We have 2 tertiary projects, very interesting, and 33 are in for-profit companies. In conclusion, I'd like just to say that non-energy benefits of energy efficiency projects positively reinforce organizations' operational excellence and strategic position. So these are key aspects for companies, and this makes energy enter into core business. And this is my third conclusion, actually. And we also have to mention that these non-energy benefits often significantly increase the financial attractiveness of energy efficiency projects. You will find much more details regarding this project on our website. So it's here, www.nbenefits.eu. And if you want to ask any question to me, you have my address email here. The last slide is on references. So if you want to complement some aspect, you can go to the last slide. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Katrin. And thank you for a really interesting presentation. And personally, I already have lots of questions I'm dying to ask on this, and I hope the audience similarly as well. But also thank you very much for excellent timekeeping. You've set a high mark for the others to follow, so I'm looking forward to all the presenters following you in a similar fashion. So let me move quickly on to Ida, who is going to Soma, excuse me, apologies, who is going to talk about low carbon transition in steel industry, a comparative study between Iran and Sweden. Soma, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Hannes, and hi everyone for being here today for this presentation. I would like to talk to you about low carbon transition in the steel industry based on comparative study of Iran and Sweden. I think that it doesn't work. Maybe. Yeah. Excuse me, Claudia. Okay, I would like to. Oh, it is really. So, I'm sorry. No. Okay. I would like to talk to you and start my presentation with a definition of technological catch-up, and it is a part of my dissertation about technological catch-up based on sustainability transition. Excuse me, I think that it doesn't work, I'm not controlling the mouse to, yeah? Yeah, please start with the second slide. Yeah, the technological capability, as you probably know, is about improvements of technological capabilities by firms in some, for example, developing countries to close the gap with the other countries that, for example, they are advanced in some technologies. Most of the studies in the recent years in the technological catch-up literature, are based on two different paths, the economic path and also the sustainable path. The attentions of sustainable path in the recent years have been increased, especially after the financial crisis of 2008. And when the sustainable development goals, and issues became more important than the past. So now the important thing that we want to just follow is that which and how, for example, these kind of countries like developing countries can catch up. And for just excuse me, can I just move to the second or third slides for me? It doesn't work. Excuse me.
Just say next slide, Soma, and I'll do it for you.
No, it is just for a slide. I need to, just focus on the third slide if it is possible.
Backwards or forwards? Is it this slide?
No, the last one. Okay, it's
This
okay.
slide?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. No, excuse me. The previous one. The previous one was well. Yeah, okay. And based on technological catch-up studies, maybe we can just answer some questions about the, how, for example, developing countries catching up in the transition era. So as you know, in the technological catch-up literature, we have some, for example, technological changes in some sectors, and each country in each time try to, for example, attract and also adopt the new technology before then, for example, the other countries. So because of that, we have witnessed that, for example, in the iron and steel in all over the world, that in each time we have a leadership, in the steel industry, because you can see in this slide that we have witnessed the technological changes in the steel industry. So maybe it is, we can extract this question that, so in the transition era, which country is going to be a leadership in the world steel industry, and what's the role of developing countries, in this development path. Next slide, please, Rachel. Yeah. So to answer these questions, we use the research method and the multiple case study, and we selected Iran as a developing country and Sweden as a developed country to gather the information about them, to about their, for example, sustainability transition and their measures about it. We just gathered both primary and secondary data, and we analyze them in the framework of multi-level perspective. And our case in particular is hydrogen direct reduction technology in both of countries. That is, currently is undergoing, in the Swedish steel industry. Next, please. Yeah, but what is MLP, or multiple level perspective? As you probably know, this framework just applied by the researchers in sustainability transitions literature. That is about, and it is based on a logic that transition would happen, through, for example, the interactions between and among the three analytical levels: the niches, the socio-technical regimes, and also socio-technical landscape. So next, please. Yeah, based on this framework, we just did some interviews in present, both in Iran and Sweden, and the main findings are that Sweden's steel industry could success in sustainability transition because of some driver factors, in the three levels of multi-level perspective. There are, for example, this in the socio-technical landscape, we have Sweden has severe pressure because of, some, for example, national and international policies and right policies, and also some cultural changes related to sustainability. And it leads to some, formulate some action plans, and also some really extraordinary collaboration between, the different actors in the sector to emerge and to introduce the new technological innovation in the steel industry. And besides this, and this pressure that put pressure on the socio-technical regime to distract and change the current regime, in Sweden steel industry also, we can see some, the measures that support this transition. They are, for example, government support for research and development, policy-making model of government that is not just based on top-down, but it is also based on bottom-up, and based on, interrelationship between the different actors, especially, for example, Jörn Contrat as a Sweden Steel Industry, Sweden Steel Association is and has a key key role in this transition, and also will establish collaboration among actors that I mentioned and public awareness. So next, please. Yeah, thank you. But I found as well that Iran faced some resistances, you know, in the current socio-technical system. And in Iran steel industry, we have some barrier factors in the 3 levels of MLP. For example, despite of, you know, despite of accepting the commitments of Paris Agreement in 2015, you can see in the figure of on the right slide that the total carbon dioxide emissions of Iran increased in, you know, from 2000 to 2017, and it means that we don't have any severe pressure in the landscape, despite of, you know, formulating the different policies, for example, in peace and 6 5-year development plans. And based on it, we can't have any expectations to have, for example, any new technological innovation in the niches. And also, we can see some restrictions in the socio-technical regime that prevent to, you know, be more sustainable this for this industry. For example, low R&D allocation, market control by fossil fuel systems is also a very important thing. Government financial support restrictions. That's because of lack of, you know, the real and right privatization, and lack of proper cooperation among the actors, because we can see that we don't have any variety of productions in the Iran steel industry, and so their communications are based on competition. Lack of proper executive policies also, that they are not related to companies' need exactly, and lack of public awareness and about, for example, the sustainable issues and the sustainable development issues and international limitations sometimes. I think that maybe can, you know, prevent this transition. So next, please. So based on our findings, we can see that on the one hand, we have the Swedish steel industry that has succeeded in hydrogen direct reduction technology pilot phase, and we can say that this country and this steel in this country is on the verge of sustainable path for catching up. But you know that we have, Sweden also has some limitations. For example, this kind of technology, you know, need to change all of the process of the steel making in the Sweden, because in the Sweden most of the plants are based on coal coal-based steel making with, for example, blast furnace. It is about 60 to % of this technology usage, and based on it, so the most of the people and skilled people just are working on the blast oxygen furnace, and it is not about, for example, it is not related to the electrical furnace that needs to move to the transition, because it is based on the direct reduction, and we need to direct reduction to this new technology. So on the other hand, we can see that Iran is not on the verge of sustainable path, but Iran could benefit from the advantage of technological catch-up based on economic growth, because of the high rate of this production. And also Iran is the #1 based on the Midrex report in 2016, the #1 of natural-based direct reduction units. So Iran for the several years has used the technology of electric arc furnace and natural-based direct reduction. So and also based on engineering, reverse engineering, it could improve the matrix process and also introduce the new version of this process, that is Persian reduction. So maybe these two countries, have some potentials and also have some limitations that maybe they can collaborate with each other to compensate, their limitations to move to towards, the transition. So it is really important question that how these countries collaborate to compensate for their limitations for decarbonization based on, for example, some prerequisite to remove or decrease Iran's barriers and also their restrictions of Swedish steel industry. I think that answer and focus on this question and also give your suggestion about these collaborations can enrich our research. So thank you for your attention, and I really want to have your suggestion for enriching my research.
Many thanks, Soma, and I really appreciate you posing that question at the end, and I think it's very appropriate to ask the audience to see if they have any particular points that they can bring into this. Yeah. Both to query the work you've done and add suggestions. And just for myself, I actually see a strong link to the non-energy benefit side of things in order to sell the business case for sustainable change as well. So it could be an interesting connection with Catherine's presentation to see how the lessons learned can be brought across. Let me move to Ida's presentation, which is a review of regional energy efficiency policies towards industrial SMEs from within Europe. And I'm looking forward to this because we've spoken a lot about SMEs and how they can be supported on energy efficiency actions in Europe in the last few sessions. So please, Ida, we will listen to your presentation.
Hello and welcome to this presentation. My name is Ida Johansson and I come from the University of Gävle in Sweden. I'm going to present to you this work, which is a review of regional energy efficiency policies towards industrial SMEs from within Europe. Small and medium-sized companies represent 99% or more of the total number of companies in most of the countries. And it is estimated by the International Energy Agency that these companies account for approximately 1/3 of the total industrial energy use. Industrial SMEs have not been the main focus in terms of research and policies, and research and energy policy programs have mainly targeted energy-intensive and large industries. And this is even though SMEs and non-energy intensive industries have a larger relative energy efficiency potential. For industrial SMEs, energy audit programs are the most commonly used policy means, and the review of energy policy programs targeting industrial SMEs show that scientific studies of policy programs mainly covered energy audit programs and also evaluation of these. Primary way for both nationally and internationally has been for governments to introduce these energy audit programs. However, for the individual SME, one of the primary ways to improve energy efficiency is to work with internal energy management. However, you can see in research that the energy management in non-energy intensive companies and SMEs, they are shown to be underdeveloped. The first generation's policy programs for SMEs, they mainly consist of energy audit programs. The second generation policy approaches, mainly energy management, they also prove to be efficient. And further, as a part of the second generation policy approaches, SMEs receiving support in the form of a group of 5 to 10 companies, so-called energy efficiency networks, they have also shown successful results. In general, you can say that the term SME is too unspecific to provide any real guidance on how to design the policy program. But the most promising energy efficiency measures in industrial SMEs, they are generally found in the support processes, such as ventilation, space heating, lighting, etc. There are 3 types of policy instruments: the administrative, which is rules, regulations, etc. Informative, such as information campaigns or programs, energy audit programs. Or economic, taxes, subsidies, financial incentives. These could be used alone or in a policy mix where they complement one another. Administrative policies can be effective for medium-sized companies, but for small companies they are less effective, and the smaller companies generally requires a more supportive approach in order to improve the energy efficiency. The aim of this paper was to provide an overview of the existing regional energy efficiency policies that targets industrial SMEs in 7 selected EU member states. Also, to provide an insight of the type of policy approach, informative, economic, or administrative, that is most commonly used in regional policy activities. This study was undertaken as a part of the EU Interreg project SME+. This is a project with the purpose of improving policy instruments to increase the energy efficiency in industrial SMEs. The project consisted of regional energy efficiency program operators and administrators from 7 different regions within the EU. Burgenland, Austria, Groningen in the Netherlands, Gävleborg, Sweden, La Rioja, Spain, Hessen, Germany, Campania, Italy, and Southwest Oltenia in Romania. Data was collected during 3 workshops within the SME+ projects. 2 were held in Sweden and 1 were held in Austria. Prior to these workshops, a literature review of scientific papers on energy efficiency policy programs for industrial SMEs were conducted. And finally, regional policy-specific reports were written by policy administrators or operators in the region, and these were put together in the paper. In this analysis, the various regional policies were categorized into regional or national policies using the below 5 major general types of energy efficiency policies. Policy program, including energy audit components. Investment subsidies. Energy efficiency networks that were offered for supporting energy management. Direct policy programs, including energy management components. And benchmarking scheme that is under operation. These 5 major general types of energy efficiency policies for industrial SMEs, they were developed and revised within the International Energy Agency's research program for energy efficiency in industrial SMEs, and we have chosen to use these for our categorization. This table presents an overview of the various regional policies, and they were categorized into regional or national policies. From this table, we can conclude that 6 out of 7 regions have policy programs including energy audit components. The region Southwest Oltenia in Romania is the only region that does not have this under operation. 6 out of 7 regions have investment subsidies available. This is not available for SMEs in Groningen in the Netherlands. 3 out of 7 regions offer energy efficiency networks, and these 3 regions are Gävle in Sweden, Burgenland in Austria, and Hessen in Germany. 5 out of 7 regions only offer direct policy programs that includes energy management components for large and/or energy-intensive companies, and none of the regions offer this for SMEs. None of the 7 regions have benchmarking schemes available for SMEs. However, in Groningen in the Netherlands, they have a national policy for ETS and energy companies. All regions provide some general information campaigns for industrial SMEs. And most of the region also have energy audit programs in place, all regions but one. These are either regional or national. The more the policies move towards detailed, more advanced takes, such as energy management and benchmarking schemes, no such policy program seems to be in place. Also, there is for several of the regions more voluntary policy programs to be developed, such as benchmarking schemes. Thank you for your attention, and please contact me if you have any questions regarding this work. Thank you.
So thanks to Ida for that very good presentation. As you saw, it was a pre-recording, but Ida is also available to take questions on this panel. So questions you pose to her on our presentation will be answered by Ida as well. I think it's a very important presentation talking about the SMEs. And one of the things we noticed over the last day and a half is that with SMEs, one of the key issues is how do we actually reach them? How do we actually start to knock on the doors to get them involved? We have many different policies and programs available for them, but stage one is actually connecting with them, how to get them on board of these different policies and programs. So perhaps that's something someone from the audience can input on or ask a question on. Please feel free. In the meantime, we move on to our last presentation. That is from Jason, who is from Dow and will speak about Dow's low carbon utilities. Jason, I hand it over to you. You might need to unmute, Jason. You're still on mute, Jason. Hello, Jason. If you can hear me, you are actually on mute. You need to unmute your microphone, please. I think we'll wait one moment. I think Jason is just doing some settings, so apologies for the small delay. So it's on our last session for panel one of our last presentation that we run into small issues, but I am chatting with Jason and he is actually working on his issue for unmuting. We will also see if the event organizer is in a position to unmute Jason. What I would suggest, Jason, if you look at the bottom left of your screen, you have your microphone mute button. You can use this.
Got it. No, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
All perfect. Don't worry. It always happens the last person with the last presentation of the last session.
Sorry. I'm not used to Zoom, and I apologize for that.
Not to worry. Don't worry. You have attracted everybody's attention, and they are now dying to hear your presentation.
Yeah, yes, of course, of course. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I'm Jason Lankford. I am the Energy Technology Center Director for Dow, and in my role, I'm responsible for the operation and technical solutions of Dow's power and utilities assets around the globe. So, don't seem to have control. If you go to the next slide. So to start off, let me tell you a little bit about Dow. We're a $43 billion company with over 36,000 employees operating in over 100 sites in 31 countries. Our ambition is to be the most innovative, customer-centric, inclusive, and sustainable material science company in the world. And to do that, we've had to set some pretty high breakthrough goals. Next slide, please. In terms of carbon sustainability, our goals are, by 2030, to reduce our net annual carbon emissions by 5 million metric tons versus a 2020 baseline, or 15% reduction. By 2050, Dow intends to be carbon neutral. This includes Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, plus product benefits. Next slide, please. So how will we get to carbon neutrality by 2050? Well, first, we're going to ensure that our products are more sustainable than alternatives. Our products have an estimated 4-to-1 greenhouse gas emissions benefit. What I mean by that is that much of our products lower customers' emissions substantially more than the carbon emissions used to produce them. And we want to ensure that our customers come to us first for sustainable alternatives. We want to advance the effectiveness of our manufacturing operations, which is what I'll be discussing in this presentation in more detail. And we want to collaborate with stakeholders to incentivize low carbon technologies. For example, we collaborate with academics, NGOs, auditing experts, technology partners, and others to ensure that companies are able to account for greenhouse gas reductions through low carbon products and technologies. Next slide, please. As we work toward this goal, regulations are tightening around the globe. We see this in North America, in Canada and the US, and in the EU. In Canada, by 2030, 30% of greenhouse gas emissions will reduce by versus 2005, and we see a carbon tax price right now of $30 per ton, increasing to $50 per ton in 2022. In EU, 50 to 55% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030 versus 1990, and net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. There are proposed border carbon adjustments for other segments as well. And in the US, we see the eventual adoption of federal carbon pricing, but the timing is uncertain. If progressives win in the next election, we expect very aggressive carbon reduction goals, similar to what we see in Canada and in the EU. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at Dow's carbon footprint, 115 million metric tons of CO2 per year. As you can see, the vast majority of our footprint comes from Scope 3 emissions. These are our feedstocks and logistics and things that are a little bit out of our direct control. In this presentation, however, I'll be focusing on what we have the most direct control over, and that is Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Scope 1 are our direct emissions from the products that we produce, and then Scope 2 are the purchased power and steam that we use in our processes. Power and steam make up about half of our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, or about 17 million metric tons of CO2 per year. Next slide, please. As we move forward, our solutions must be sustainable, reliable, and affordable. These are our lenses. As a start, we consistently work on becoming more energy efficient. For example, we utilize all of our industrial waste heat, and we look for technologies to lower our power and heat needs. We utilize renewable contracts where we can, and we are always working on new breakthrough technologies. Next slide, please. So on the technology front, we drafted a rough heat map of known technologies. We looked at fuel options like biomass and hydrogen, renewables like wind and solar, nuclear energy, different acute technologies like electric boilers, heat pumps, steam recompression, and finally carbon capture. So let's start at the bottom here. Carbon capture is a proven, known technology that we can employ today to reduce carbon. But we don't view this as a long-term solution, but as a bridging technology until more sustainable technologies can come into being. You can also see that the investment and operation of carbon capture is quite restrictive. Some solutions, like electric boilers, heat pumps, have not advanced enough to provide the industrial heat that we need. We can see this possibly advancing in the next decade or so. Nuclear power has come a long way in terms of society, in terms of safety, and much work is being done to create modular reactors that can produce high temperature and high pressure steam. But public perception and policy and cost barriers keep this technology from becoming a viable option for industry in the foreseeable future. Renewable power is advancing very quickly, but power grid stability to combat renewable intermittency is not where the industry needs it. Significant scale up of storage installation batteries will be required. U.S. energy storage, for example, is presently 2% of our generation capacity, and 94 of that is pumped hydro. 94% of that is pumped hydro. So we have the projected scale up of stationary batteries required to support renewables is just huge. So to keep a grid reliable for industry needs, multiple things must happen. When we have large blocks of generation on a system trip, the system must stay stable. That means that frequency cannot drop too fast or too far such that it goes unstable. And this time frame that we're talking about is a half a second to 10 seconds. So generation and load must instantaneously balance, and the difference is made up by storage or by steady state, what we call inertial stability from rotating equipment. So the grid stability provided by the inertia of rotating equipment keeps power dips from becoming plant trips. And so with the wind and solar, we still see that we need the rotating equipment in order to provide the stability of a grid. And that's what that, in that competitive, that AU, that's the asset utilization. Renewable energy is also not advanced enough to provide the needed industrial heat. For example, for a cracker, we need about 850 degrees Celsius. And we use steams of over 100 bars with pressures of over 500 degrees Celsius. And renewable energy just does not get us to those temperatures and pressures. And really advanced nuclear and electric boilers and heat pumps don't get us there either. Hydrogen is turning out to be an interesting choice, with blue hydrogen perhaps paving a way for low carbon power and heat. Blue hydrogen is produced from the reformation of natural gas and is utilized with carbon capture. Hydrogen can be burned and used for heat or power, and technologies are advancing in how and where hydrogen can be burned. Hydrogen burning advancements in cogens, for example, can possibly provide low carbon inertial power and grid stability. And then green hydrogen, produced from electrolysis powered from renewables, could then advance enough to replace blue hydrogen in a hydrogen economy where established hydrogen infrastructure is not wasted. Biomass, though very interesting, is very regional in its application. For example, in Brazil, we have a plant where we use eucalyptus trees from a eucalyptus forest as a sustainable fuel for boilers. Eucalyptus trees grow very, very quickly. So as part of the forest is harvested, it's replanted. And then we're ready for harvesting again as the cycle comes back. But as you can imagine, this is very labor intensive and very restricted to specific areas. Next slide, please. So as you can see from that chart, there are no single solutions or silver bullets out there for industry. Progress has to be made in all areas, and we're looking at all areas very intently and investing where we can. Very importantly, governmental policies must meet up with technology to meet our societal needs, and infrastructure, specifically electrical infrastructure and the piping and the infrastructure needed for carbon capture or the new hydrogen economies need to be established and built. And this is no small task. Next slide, please. So to conclude, as Dow moves toward meeting our short-term and long-term goals, to meet our short-term goals, we're going to have to use energy efficiency projects right now to meet those goals, and we're consistently doing that. We're going to look at renewables where we can and where these make sense and where we can utilize them without compromising grid stability. And we're going to use carbon capture as a bridging technology until we can find ways to not have to store as much carbon, to not produce as much carbon. And then to meet our 2050 goals, we'll need to continue to collaborate and innovate step-changing technologies across the value chain that lower our carbon emissions. And that is it. And I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Jason. And I'm actually delighted that yours was the last presentation of the last session for this panel, because I think you've summed up really, really well, especially with that one slide with the table, how complicated it is actually, the decarbonization journey, how many different elements we need to consider. Now, I know we're talking from a large industry perspective, but I think it sums up very well the complexity of what this is all about. Plus, that table just was referring to scope 1 and scope 2. It wasn't actually referring to the larger problem, your 4/5 of a problem in the supply chain, which again is aside from this. So I think when we take everything that has been presented during the panel 1 sessions to date, I think one, we need, we'll just say we need a lot more coherence between different policies to be able to address all of these different very complex issues. So I'm very glad that was the kind of, let's say, the final presentation to put things into context. And please, I say this both to the panelists and to the audience, please pick up on that, let's say, challenge that we're facing within industry to deal with all of these different separate elements of decarbonization. So throw your questions up in relation to that if you so wish. In the meantime, what I will do is launch into the first questions that were posed by the audience, and these date back to Kathrine's original presentation and non-energy benefits. And Kathrine, if I can put to you a question, which is asked by Rod. It says, Kathrine, you talk about different cultures. How does the multiple benefit approach you show compete with or complement ENMS, energy management systems, such as ISO 50001? Can I put that to you, please?
Wow, what a question. I'm surprised by the question because for me, these two subjects are not fully connected actually, because as far as I know, ISO 50001 doesn't address these kind of aspects. So ISO 50001 doesn't consider different actors and different cultures into organizations. So this is why our approach into the multiple benefits project is a complementary approach. So energy management is extremely important, but we find ways to build on common interests and on common languages between different functions.
No, it's fair.
I hope I hope the answer is more or less understandable.
No, I think it is. And the question was, does it compete or complement? And I think you've just answered that it complements.
It's complement,
EMS.
yes, definitely.
And maybe to add to your answer, maybe what's coming out of this is that EMS could actually be updated to take more account or have ways of helping non-energy benefits. I don't know if that would be something you'd like to add to as well. Is it something that we could bring into ENMS, or is it something that we treat as a complementary action always?
So ISO 50001 is one type of NMS. So it is possible to have a different, I mean, a larger, broader approach. So I think definitely, yes, it would be interesting to complement energy management under the ISO perspective with a more multi-stakeholder approach of the type of the one we propose.
Okay. While I have you, we have another question posed to you as well, and I might as well ask while we have you. Ready to go? Katrin, which project contribution from steps 1 to 4 is the most influential in convincing companies to implement an energy efficiency project? Okay,
thank you for this question. It's an extremely interesting question. I would like to say that the three steps of the analysis, so the operational, strategic and financial, contribute in an equal way to raising the project interests to decision makers. Now we will have more answers on that when we have the results of the pilot projects. So again, you can go to the website. You can register to the mail to the information letter, and you can follow the progresses there. But my answer is that the three pillars of the approach are important. Definitely. Also because it speaks to different people into organizations. So operations, strategy, sales and marketing, and finance. Okay. What I'm going to do is build on the whole non-energy benefits topic a little bit, because a lot of what I saw it in Soma's presentation, there's this lack of a business case for sustainability. Iran needs to be sold on sustainability. And very often the fact that when we talk about sustainability, we consider it as something, an environmental obligation, rather than a business opportunity, rather than a modernization opportunity. And if we take this into account and we look at, and I have to say this question is particularly relevant to Jason, if you say that this sustainability has a business case, one, how do we bring that business case into business strategy, into a core part of business decisions? And more importantly, perhaps, how do we, when we understand the business case as a company, how do we sell that to our supply chain? Because to get our supply chain on board, we have to convince them as well. We can't just hit them with a stick. We have to say, we want you to help us, but there's a reason behind it because it makes business sense. How can we do that within a company? How can we best go forward on it? Jason, if I may put that to you first.
That's a good question. I think that number one, the business case is there. We see that already in our customers that are asking for carbon footprint of products, for example, and we can already see the business case of the results of not doing it, for example. I think that where we operate regionally, I think that the countries are pushing us toward a more sustainable in terms of business cases as well, because as those countries impose levies and taxes, you know, we do it or it's going to cost us more. So that it becomes, and of course we have to also understand that as it costs us more to operate, it's going to cost the customers more to purchase these products. That's that partnership that we have to have with the governments in those policies for subsidies, for different infrastructure that is being built. in order to help us achieve a decent our business goals that as we move forward. Does that answer your question?
What I'll take from it is the governments have to come out and say carbon is just going to cost an awful lot of money in the future. Let's go for it. And once it's obligatory, we have no choice.
and it's, you know, someone's going to have to pay for it. I mean, that's just the truth. It costs a lot of money to decarbonize. It's not, there's no magic pill or anything that we can do. It's going to cost us as a society resources to get this done. And as Dow we indicated, we're all in. Well, we're ready to go, but it's a big problem and not something that is easily tackled, and it's not something that you can just press a button and do.
Well, we have figured out in the next 30 years, basically. Now, Jason, actually, I'm going to deviate slightly, but it's resting with you because I just got a question here from Erwin. And he's actually asking you directly, what is the contribution of energy efficiency in the decarbonization strategy of Dow? Now, you had your table where you listed all the different elements, but if you just say energy efficiency, is that making up 10%, 20%, not much?
It's not much. I mean, in terms of, you know, the overall carbon scope 1 and scope 2, you know, let's say that it's 37 million tons, maybe we can get 1 million tons, you know. So it's really not much because we are very energy efficient. Now, as we, in some cases, when we build a new cracker, for example, a new what we call the best technology cracker, is much more efficient than an older cracker. So as we move those assets to newer technologies, that certainly does help a lot. And we are moving toward that. And I guess you could call that energy efficiency, but we also call that technology advances. So, you know, just changing out lighting or moving to a more efficient pump or a more efficient motor or moving from a steam driver to an electric driver, those make incremental gains, but to really make a step change, we're going to have to go to renewable energy. We're going to have to go to a hydrogen burning because those are the very big step changes that we have to have if we really want to make those changes. And I did see a question, you know, talking about, you know, our 2030 targets, 15% is not very ambitious. It's because the time frame involved in doing some of these things to really make a step change, to have the infrastructure around to electrify a site, for example. I would need to electrify one cracker, 3 huge power plants just to provide the electricity to do that. We don't have the infrastructure to do that. It would take a decade just to build, you know, and get that stuff even advanced enough. It's a time problem. You have time and resources, and that's the reality of where we are in industry. I'm
very interested with your answers, and I think I think for the audience, for the panelists, it's very interesting to get the direct industry perspective, especially from a large company like Dow on this, because it poses questions. And I'd be happy to get more questions from the audience in relation to this, challenging Jason effectively, if I may say, Jason. So please, I'm going to put you on pause for a second, Jason, because I think it'll be interesting to see what else we get to challenge you with. In the meantime, I want to move to Soma, because this idea of business case, which we talked a little bit about with Jason about, is I want to talk to you about that as well, because you kind of posed the question, I saw it on your last slide, you know, there's no real buy-in for sustainability in Iran. Have you come across already ways that it can be sold, that the culture can be changed from this is about an environmental obligation, more it's actually about a modernization approach. Energy efficiency, decarbonization, these are ways to become more competitive, to become more modern, to be more productive, builds on the non-energy benefits that Katrin explained. What is it from your perspective that can be done in Iran on this?
Thank you for your interesting question. I think that, as I mentioned, you know, Iran, because of locking carbon and also cost dependence, sometimes has some, resistances to, for example, be more sustainable, in the different sectors. And in Iran, we have the different, for example, people that they are for and against, for the sustainability. And some people just told me that, for example, in the interviews, okay, Iran now is in the sustainability transition because, for example, we are using the natural gas-based, direct reductions. And it is, as you know, they say that it is low emitters, for example, than the others. But I think that it is not just about maybe just a country and, for example, a developing country, because the most of the studies, just focus on, for example, the developed countries, or it is not about some scale based. And so I think that some policies we need, and maybe some supports needs from the international, level. It is besides, for example, the Iran. And I think that maybe in the future, as I, research and also asked, for example, the interviews in Iran, most of them like, to, for example, use the CCS or also hydrogen direct reduction with collaboration with other countries, for the future. But it is just some resistances. And I think maybe we can have this collaboration, but based on some, prerequisites that I also mentioned in my last, points. For example, as you know, we have some sanctions, economic sanctions, in Iran, and maybe it leads to some problem for Iran. And if, for example, in the close future, we can solve and we can cope with some kinds of these problems, and also we can have the right policies in Iran. Besides this international, for example, supports, we can also, move towards this kind of sustainability, in the sector. Is it the right answer your question or not? Yeah.
There's no right or wrong. There's just an answer. There's just an answer. And I think actually all of the answers are very interesting. And I think ultimately what we're doing is, we could discuss this for a long time yet. And I think it's very interesting to get all of these different perspectives. And the one thing I'm going to take from your answer actually is this need for international cooperation. Let's call it cross-border experience sharing, cross-border for companies, especially if we take, for example, Dow is active in many different countries, and it's not the only company like this. They have supply chains in many different companies. And if we look at industry overall, I think we need a lot more cross-border collaboration with cohesive policies. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I do a lot of work with the UN on this topic, and there's a huge need. I mean, we have a big demand for industry on international cooperation on this. And so I agree fully with your point there. And I think it's a point we'll see if we have time to expand on it.
Yeah, exactly.
But what I'd like to do is, Katrin actually has a question for Ida. And I think the easiest thing to do is, Katrin, if you can ask her directly in your words, then Ida can answer it directly for you. That might make the most efficient sense in this case.
Okay, fine. Yes, thank you, Ida, for your presentation. And I'm collaborating to energy audit programs here in Switzerland. And so I've also investigated what are the results of energy audit programs in terms of actual implementation of energy efficiency measures. And I was wondering if you have analyzed the results of energy audit programs in Europe, analyzed at this level of implementation of the energy efficiency measures. And also I've noticed in Switzerland, sometimes there are public programs. So it's a second question. There are public programs in Switzerland proposing subsidies for certain measures to be implemented. And subsidies are not asked by companies. So these public programs, they stay with subsidies available, which may look strange. And then the last question, but okay, it's why did you use the label administration instead of using obligation? But I must say I'm more interested in your two first answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, the question with the implemented measures from the energy audits. I haven't evaluated the energy programs included in this review, but you can see when you previous evaluations of one of the world's biggest energy audit programs in America and a big program in Sweden, they show that approximately half of the suggested measures are implemented, so about 50%. And an evaluation of an Australian program showed an implementation rate of 80%. But I think in general, 50% is kind of assumed from an energy audit, 50% of the measures to be implemented in the companies when you look at these bigger evaluations of big programs.
It's very high. Yeah? It's very high.
50%.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it may look low, but I've seen other results. I've seen 30%, for instance, or 40, depending on the program. So 50 seems a good result.
Yes, and it's also a matter of what type of measures are implemented. Maybe they prioritize the measures that have the biggest savings. That doesn't really say in the evaluations I have looked at, but it doesn't have to correspond to the level of or the achieved energy efficiency. That could be higher than 50%.
Yeah,
based on what type of measures they implement.
I think it would be really interesting to develop a broad survey on that. So what are the results of energy audits?
Ida, can I jump in quickly actually here, because I'd like to, I think building a little bit on this and also reflecting back on your presentation, there was one, that you had one slide which outlined all the different policies, the 5 different policies put forward by the IEA, the categorization. And what's noticeable is that no country has a full collection of these. At best, 2/3 of these policies are applied within one given region or country. If we take into account the way these policies are applied, do we see a step change happening, that countries are actually seeing that that a mix of all of these different policies are required and that are slowly going in this direction? Or has it been relatively static the last while, that countries are not actually progressing, bringing in the full mix of different policies?
I would probably say that I don't know exactly how. I hope they are. I hope they are realizing that they need to have a broader policy mix. Also because, as I said in the presentation, also SMEs are often bundled as a group, but they don't really. The same policy doesn't target all SMEs because it's a matter of production complexity or the sector they apply to. So in order to kind of target the bigger group of SMEs, you need to have a policy mix, and I hope that there is a more awareness of that from policy those who design policy operators, and hopefully because there hasn't been a lot of research towards policies for SMEs, but that's increasing. So hopefully the knowledge is spread to the policy operators also.
We're coming back to cross-border collaboration and sharing of experiences to really get this right, I think. I think it's an interesting topic that we'll see how much we move on to in the next few minutes. But I do want, because there is actually a question that has just come in, and it's to Soma. So Soma, if I can ask you quickly, to what extent is the Iranian policy framework stimulating or hampering energy efficiency? I would assume that subsidized energy prices are not stimulating energy efficiency. And this is kind of, you've presented a lot of different barriers, but this is directly related to energy efficiency. And I suppose asking, is there even much awareness of energy efficiency and the benefits?
Yeah, exactly. So the fossil fuel subsidies, is really important barriers in the current region for Iran. So it is really actually, hampering, for example, this transition. But on the one, hand, I think that maybe the government can put some pressure, on the regime and the sectors to, for example, move towards the sustainability. Another thing I think is about the collaboration. For example, you can imagine that in Iran, we have the for example, electrical arc furnaces and also the direct reductions. So it is based on natural gas. And maybe in Iran, and based on, for example, some kinds of FDI and foreign developments, for example, from the other countries, we can also have, improve this and maybe we can compensate these subsidies. We can, for example, increase the share of hydrogen based on natural gas by investing by, for example, the collaboration of the other countries, and also the other countries, for example, use the potentials of, for example, skilled people. Maybe it can compensate. But I think that the more important thing is about our government and the policies, to facilitate this transition by, for example, limiting or removing these subsidies that in Iran is really high in rate, rather than the other countries. Yeah.
It's we're coming in. We looked at a few different points there. One, like again, looking at the international involvement, the removal of subsidies. But one thing comes up here as well is to do all of this, we need to actually be able to engage with the industry. We need to be like, if we want to talk about removing subsidies, for example, just doing it overnight without an engagement will probably cause chaos and a lot of resistance. So, and I think this is a question now I would put to the whole panel. Throughout all of this, if we want to talk about the business case, if we want to talk about bringing in better policies, more cohesive policies across borders, we need to actually engage better between the different stakeholders, whether it's industry and the policymakers, but also the other supporting organizations, the research organizations, the financial organizations, the international organizations. One, how do we actually reach out and knock on the doors of the companies, right down to the SMEs, which remain a big problem for everybody? And two, how do we create the best type of engagement between the three different stakeholders so that there's a joint effort in bringing about this kind of policy change, not a drastic end to subsidies, but rather a policy change, for example, that brings in supports, that brings in the business case for energy efficiency, rather than just deliberately cutting off a subsidy or forcing through a policy or whatever it may be. So the question, how do we engage together better, and how do we knock on the doors in a more effective way of the companies? I'll put it to the panel, and whosever hand I see going up first gets the privilege of the answer. Otherwise, I'll just point you out. So Jason, I see you debating to put up your hand, so I'll assume that you put your hand up to answer that question.
We have a big, investment into governmental affairs that industry that we're actively engaged in all the time. So, one thing that we do is we have people in our business that all they do is just reach out to the governments and talk to the governments, talk to the academics. I think that businesses need to invest more into that space, and in some cases, it's kind of a off to the side. We're not investing the resources that we need, but I think we need to invest more resources, more time and effort into engaging into that governmental space to just begin that dialogue. Because I think that you're right. I think there's misunderstandings of what can be done and what can't be done, what's possible, what's not possible, and so I think that from an industry perspective, what we can do better is invest more time and energy and resources into that space and spend more time in that dialogue and get into more things like this where we can talk policies and just have this broader conversation and understanding.
One thing that's interesting there is, and again, I'll speak about this from experience with a few projects I've done through the UN on this topic, is that there's also this topic, who from a company should engage with a government or a policymaker? Is it a public affairs person, Or is it actually somebody from engineering who's coming with knowledge of this is our issue? This is what we need to deal with. Let's talk about a practical approach to policy development that takes into account the engineering. Or should it be someone who talks generically about the overall business? Or is it both? I mean, I think, again, it's a type of representation of the industry there that might be important.
Well, there are different skill sets, right? You don't want an engineer necessarily. We're not very good communicators sometimes. So, and really distilling down the details in order to give it, get it out to the broader audience is a very unique skill set. From Dow's perspective, we have these oversight committees that I'm a part of, where I'm on a team with a governmental or public affairs person. And so we communicate back and forth, and that communication is that when I feel that the governmental affairs person or the public affairs person understands enough of what to do, then they can engage, and they can bring me in as needed because they are that liaison and they understand that. So I think that the businesses need to make sure that it's not just this governmental affairs, rubber stamp. This is what the governmental affairs or public affairs persons are talking about. Real scientifically driven and manufacturing, a good understanding of manufacturing. And that's our job. My job is to make sure that they understand that.
Okay. Katrin, building on that particular answer from Jason, I mean, we have an example of a company, Trudeau, that honestly is probably quite engaged on programs and with government discussions, etc. Now, through your projects with the non-energy benefits, you're reaching out to companies to try and convince them, we'll say, of the non-energy benefits. And also there's an element of working with a company on a research, on innovation. I mean, there's a research connection perhaps to this work as well. How do you see it needing to be done to kind of knock on the door of a company and say, look, here's a great way for you to save money, improve your productivity, and by the way, also save energy. What's the approach that you would suggest we should be taking to knock on the doors of companies and be able to sell them this concept? If they're not already taking into account, they're not motivated, and they're probably the ones that are I won't say the biggest issue, but that they need a lot of work done. You're still on mute, Katrin.
Dow Chemical is a very large company, and in large companies, there is a connection between operations and energy issues, but it's not the case for companies of a small size. Now, to answer more directly your question, I would say that companies make investment decision making based on the contribution, how they assess the contribution of the investment to their core business. But engineers present energy efficiency projects only in technical energy saving and financial saving terms. So the way energy people present projects to other, let's say that very broadly, other people in companies is not appropriate. So this is why the project multiple benefits, it's a way to analyze differently an energy efficiency investment project and to show the contribution of the project to a company's core business. But it is not enough, because we do that, so we propose a method. But then you also need to be trained to be able to present, to use, to apply some business management concepts. And I think for me, and I'm working now in this field and training and so on for 15 years, I think one of the most important issues is to train engineers to speak other businesses' functions, language. So this is first. And second, we have a problem of access to the senior executives, because very often as energy people, we communicate with energy people inside companies. And those energy people, energy managers or people in charge of energy issues, they don't have the right language and the right connection to present projects to the senior executive. So there's a gap, and frankly, I don't yet have the answer to your question. I know training is a key aspect. Teach people to be able to put somebody else's lenses to understand the other person's perspective is important, but still we have a problem of access. And we need to really, overcome this problem.
Okay, you have brought me bang on to the end of our session at 12:30. So many thanks, Katrin. And I think what I have taken from this very, very interesting discussion, and I think it's a great sum up of the panel one overall, is that the problem of decarbonisation is very complex. Even if we look at scope 1 to scope 2, as shown by Jason, it is a multitude of solutions and topics we need to overcome. That's not including scope 3, which remains a much, much bigger issue. We need to talk about cross-border knowledge exchange, but very, very important, getting policies that are also cohesive between different countries, and also this communication gap. I mean, Katrin, you brought it up there in the last moment. I think communication gap is big, whether it's between industry and policymakers, whether it's between energy people and energy people, the engineer, the CEO. We have huge communication gaps, which are really impeding overall progress. So I think starting there of how to communicate better between the key people might be important to getting this cross-border policy program approach, which will then help address all of these kind of complex issues that are surrounding decarbonisation. We have the solutions, we just have to figure them out, how to get them all working together in one cohesive manner. So many thanks to all the panelists. It has been really great to finish up panel 1 sessions with you. I want you to imagine a really wonderful, loud, resounding applause from a very silent audience that are there virtually, but under normal circumstances, you would be getting the applause. So many thanks, and also to the audience for taking part and contributing with their questions. I wish you all a great afternoon, and please feel free to continue the discussion on the chat and Q&A function on the Whova platform. Many thanks, and all the very best.